that's actually gone through the Gambeson.
Hi guys, my name is Stavros. I'm the author of the Tome of 6, Book 1 of the Fateful Force, and I'm also a Warbow Archer. Today we have another Warbow versus Armour video. Okay, in this video what we're going to be doing is testing our 100 pound H1 Heavy Draw versus a lightly armoured and shielded opponent. Now we have done a shield test in the past, and so have a lot of people, but like many tests, and this is not a criticism of anyone else's test because I've done the same thing, when we do that shield test we generally just do the arrows versus the shield. Not many people that do those tests have something behind the shield, which would have been very common and very typical of the medieval period. So what we are going for today is for an ensemble which I believe to be a fairly lightly armoured opponent, however, that has the benefit of a shield. Now what this does do is it gives us an indication of how the compositing effect of the ensemble does synergize together. So today what we do have is a new shield. Okay, this is a more traditional shield to our last shield. So in our last test we did use a poplar shield, but the problem with this shield was, which I didn't know at the time until I tested it, is that it's made of plywood. It's not a historical construction.
A big thank you to Atelier Layh for providing me the shield, and I will put a link to their store in the description.
Okay, so instead what we have today is, so it's 13 millimeters on average thickness because it's got a variable thickness of planked poplar. It is then backed with canvas on both sides and then bound together with bones glue. So it's a very what I believe to be a historical representation of a heater shield of the period. Now of course shields can vary, thicknesses, sizes and whatnot. So that's the shield. Behind that shield we have a Gambeson. Now this Gambeson is my Spes Medieval Markets Gambeson, and it's a 30 layer Gambeson, but I think there needs to be some context to what 30 layers means. In our very first arrows versus armor test, we did do a Gambeson test, and what we did do is we highlighted that 30 layers doesn't always equal 30 layers. So what I have here is a sample of this armor. So when I purchased the armor from Spes Medieval Markets, they also sent me a sample of the exact thickness, 30 layers, of what's on the body of this armor, so that I can obviously test with arrows. I also got another sample of 30 layers of linen from Steel Mastery, and what we saw in that test is that the Steel Mastery sample was far more resistive to the arrows than the Spes Medieval Market sample. And the reason for that is that this sample here, the light sample as I call it, has got about a 7 millimeter compressed thickness on average, whereas this one has a 10.5 millimeter compressed thickness on average. So the difference between these garments is in the weight of the linen. So the Spes Medieval Markets linen is 150 grams per meter squared in density, whereas the thicker, more resistive Gambeson sample is 190 grams per meter squared. So in essence, the Spes Medieval Markets Gambeson 30 layers really simulates 21 layers of the Steel Mastery sample. Now, if we assume that 190 square meters is appropriate for a Gambeson of the period, and we look at, say, perhaps the most quoted ordnance and source for Gambeson armor, which is the ordnance of King Louis in the 15th century, the Spes Medieval Markets Gambeson that I have here represents the low end of that protective quality prescribed by the ordnance. So what I think we do have here is a lightly armored soldier, and we're going to call him Jeff because that's what my kids have called him, is Jeff. So Jeff here is a lightly armored soldier with a shield, and what we want to see is how the compositing effect of the shield and the armor synergize together, because we know that arrows, and I'm not the only one who's done the shield tests, do actually go through the shields. Now the degree of how far they penetrate is going to be subject to a number of properties: the thickness of the shield, so the resistive qualities of the shield, the arrowhead types, as well as the power of the bow. I'm going to be using a 100-pound bow, the H1 Heavy Draw by Arley bow, and we do know from my test with arrowheads from about 900 grains all the way to 1300 grains that the H1 Heavy Draw could produce anywhere between about 85 and 93 joules of energy. Now of course when we do this test we are going to be firing at 8 to 10 yards. It's virtually point blank, so we're going to be extracting pretty much the full energy out of the bow as per the chronograph readings in our tests. But what's important as well is to note that we can assign that to a heavier bow at range as well. So if we assume, based on limited tests that we have out there, that a bow loses about 20% of its energy at 50 to 60 yards, as demonstrated by Todd and Joe Gibbs on Todd's channel, then what we can assume is that the H1 Heavy Draw at between 85 and 93 joules of energy is simulating a 120 pound bow, or maybe 120, 125 pound bow at about 50 to 60 yards. So that is also really important to take into consideration, that it's not just the power of the 100-pound bow that we are testing here. We can obviously simulate that power based on the range that we are conducting these tests to heavier bows at various different ranges to see how this arm would fare against different bows at different ranges. So I think that's quite important to take into consideration as well. So it'd be interesting to see how the soldier behind the shield does fare. Now, of course, I've got ballistic gel. My ballistic gel torso is behind the Gambeson itself. And what's also going to be interesting is where the hand is. So I'll show that later on camera, but I have passed the other sleeve of the Gambeson through the straps of the shield, and I have a pool noodle in there with a wooden rod in order to simulate some type of resistive material like an arm with a bone in it, so that when arrows do strike, there is some type of resistance there to facilitate an arrow, give it a chance to penetrate that Gambeson. And sleeves themselves are 8 layers, so obviously they're not 30 layers. That's the weak point of this armor, is the sleeve. So it's going to be interesting to see how the overall armor performs, as well as specifically the weak areas of the armor. Now, with that said, let's head on down to the range and see how Jeff fares against our 100-pound bow. What we'll do is, we know that these bows can change in weight depending on the temperature. So we just want to confirm that the bow actually is 100 pounds today, which I think it should be. Okay, you can see that. 103, 104. Okay, so just a quick look at what we have here. So we have the Gambeson with the ballistic gel inside and the shield, and we can see what I've done is I've strapped the arm through the straps of the shield, had it close to the body. I want to give the arrows a kind of like a best case scenario. Usually a soldier may hold the shield further away from them, but I want it fairly braced. I want to give the arrows the best possible chance to penetrate. I believe that weak parts are going to be here where the shoulder is, where it is very flush to the shield. But even here, we can put our hand through, and there's a small gap between the forearm and the shield itself, as well as down here, we're going to be pretty close to the Gambeson as well. So just depending on where the arrows land, the curvature of the shield actually provides a certain level of defense innately, because it creates a kind of buffer zone around the body even when you do brace it really close. So that's a really good design feature of these shields. And we can see here the pool noodle that I've got inside the sleeve, and how I've put one arrow and a 1/2-inch rod in there to simulate some bone, some resistance, so that the arrows can actually hit something that does give up resistance and then drive through the sleeve if they can, rather than have something that's floppy and not providing any resistance. So let's head on over and see how we go. That is in. Cressy Warbotkins. That is in. That is in. Square section needle bottles. 1,177, fairly heavy. That is in. 1,120 grain. That is in. 800 grain on a 3/8-inch square section needle. This one is actually made of wrought iron. That's actually gone through the Gambeson because it went high, but that just proves that these will actually go straight through the armor without the shield. So it's good that we did that, even though I'm a little bit upset that I missed. We have another square section needle though, 789 grains. That is in. Last arrow for the 100-pound bow is going to be a Hector diamond section type 7 needle on a 3/8-inch shaft, 920 grains.
And that snapped, as you saw on the shield itself. Okay, let's take the camera down, see what kind of damage we did or we didn't, and see how our lightly armored soldier fared. Will it be enough to protect him, or will the shield not matter enough to stop the arrows from penetrating into the ballistic torso beneath the Gambeson? Okay, so these are all the arrows that hit. One did miss the shield and went through the Gambeson, and I actually want to show that one first, just to show you that this Gambeson can be penetrated fairly easily with this bow. This was an 800 grain square section needle. Come around here, please. That's 60 layers of linen. Okay, that's what a 100-pound bow will do at this range. Come around this way, it did hit the ballistic gel. The arrow that's gone through 2 layers of the Gambeson from the front to back and gone across, like created probably a laceration to the soldier that would have been behind this armor, is actually gone through the shoulder and then the back. So that's actually not 60 layers of Gambeson, it's 12 plus 30. So we're looking at 42 layers of linen in this configuration. So that's important to note, that I picked that on that after the fact. So it's still demonstrating that 42 layers of this linen, the arrow, the H1 heavy draw with between, we'll say 85 and 93 joules of energy, depending on the weight of the arrows, is able to go through 42 layers of this linen while dragging a wound channel across the soldier's flesh underneath as well. We can see how it's actually grazed along the ballistic gel, creating a channel. So there's actually some resistance to flesh, but that would have created a laceration, gone through 60 layers of at least this standard of Gambeson, which is quite interesting. You can see the power of the bow. What we can see is that because of the curvature that I talked about earlier, that provides a kind of an air barrier that the arrows have to get penetrate far enough in order to reach the Gambeson itself. And we're seeing that it doesn't really do that, especially in the furthest parts. However, where we have penetrations against the arm, we can actually see in here that it looks like possibly sticking into the arm. This one down here as well is this arrow here looks to be doing the same as well into the elbow. We will pull them out, take the shield out, and see how much penetration we have actually into the arm. But judging by the arrowheads themselves, it doesn't look to be all that massive, but we'll come back and we'll see how we went. So I'm just going to be marking the arrows, which I can see there's at least 1, 2, 3, and this one's really hard down here, the actual M2 Tudor. 4 of them that actually went into, which is actually pretty good aim, because that's what I was trying to do, to see the ones that actually go to the weakest part of the armor. Obviously the body is safe, except for in this case here, where we see, you know, the shield might have been too low. That's what the arrow will do without the shield. It will go literally through 2 layers of Gambeson. So we can most definitely see, obviously, 1, 2, 3 arrows and a 4th down here have stuck into the foam. How far they've gone, we'll find out in a moment when we actually rip them out and see how we went. We don't actually, okay, perfect. So this is actually really interesting. I'm going to show the Gambeson as well. 2 of them, definitely these 2 here appeared to go through the Gambeson. The 3rd one, even though I've marked it, it's kind of pushed the linen, but it actually hasn't punctured the linen, whereas these 2 punctured it by a little bit, and this one here as well, the M2, that's only just, that would have been on the elbow, that's punctured as well. So what I'll do is I'll show you on the pool noodle, and then I'll also show, so we can see where the individual arrows have struck, like that, because it's where the indentations are, but it's not massive. And now we'll show the Gambeson itself as well, and we can see here we've got 1 hole there that's gone through there, another one here definitely perforated only just, and remember this is only 8 layers of linen and there is no 3rd hole on the other side of the Gambeson. 2 of them, only 2 of them really penetrated, and then the one back, no, it's on this side, it's on this side, back here it is. It's really hard to see actually, that one. That one actually might not have penetrated either. That is fascinating. No, it didn't penetrate. It didn't penetrate. Okay, so we found where it struck the M2 right here, and it's not a penetration. It's obviously pushing the sleeve into the pool noodle. The pool noodle is creating some type of resistance, but then the Gambeson, just 8 layers, is enough to stop the M2. Now, I'm not quite surprised by the M2. We'll go look at the shield again. We can look at the M2s in general. The M2s in general aren't really penetrating all that fast, so the shield's actually slowing down the M2s faster than definitely the needles. The needles are penetrating really far, and the Cresties are doing quite well as well. So yeah, how would a lightly armored soldier with the benefit of shield fare against a 100-pound bow? Well, according to this, quite well actually, as long as the arrows hit the shield first. If it doesn't hit the shield first, he's going to be in massive trouble. Now, we've got to understand, this is for this shield, for this Gambeson, with my bow, but with my bow, we have put it through a chrono. We know how much energy it's producing. It's 100 pounds at about 8 yards, which will simulate a 120 to 125 pound bow at about 50 to 60 yards. So we can definitely see that this combination of armor, and like even when it hits Gambeson of only 8 layers after it goes through the shield, how much of a difference it makes, whereas when it doesn't hit the shield, it goes through 60 layers of Gambeson. Granted, it didn't go deep into the ballistic gel itself, but it still grazed along the ballistic gel, so that's providing some resistance as well. So if that was a soldier at the time, it would have been a deep laceration, and the armor wouldn't have helped all that much. But that's the results. What we'll do is actually, we might give Oscar a go with the shield as well. He's got his Qinghai, and he's got his spearhead arrow as well from our last tests. We'll give him a go at it as well, see how he goes. Maybe that arrow fares a bit better, but we do know that the H1, based on the ballistic tests, does produce more power than his Qinghai.
This is a new arrow. There was some destruction to the last one in behind the scenes testing. So this one's got now a proper, I'll bring this in here, it's got a proper shoulder on the tang, so it should send that shock into the arrow shaft a little bit better. Alright.
Ooh, what happened?
I broke the arrow. I think I hit the foam.
No, you didn't hit the foam.
I didn't hit the foam.
No, you hit the edge of the shield.
Did I?
Yep, right here. All right, so we have, this is where it actually hit. That's incredible. It's actually hit the leather on the edge of the shield, cut the leather, hasn't gone through though, and then let's have a look at the arrow.
Yeah, take a look at the arrow.
That's insane.
All right.
Okay, so Oscar's repaired that arrow. Let's see how good the repair job is, but it looks to be serviceable. Have a look at it.
So and it was a nice soft tang, so I was able to bend it back without snapping anything. Definitely in terms of durability, so far holding up a lot better than the other arrow.
Yeah.
Might be able to get some other.
Let's see if we get another strike on it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so that's the spearhead from the Qinghai, and it looks like to have hit the Gambeson. We don't know if it's actually penetrated, so we're going to take the shield off. So we know that it's actually hit the Gambeson, but we don't know if it's penetrated through the Gambeson. We'll take it off and we'll see if there's a hole in the Gambeson. But it appears on cursory look, it looks like the Gambeson actually done its job and defeated the arrow from penetrating any further. So we'll do, yeah, it has. Look at this. I'm just taking. I didn't even have to take. I was about to like just. Didn't have to look at this. Yes. Yeah. It's completely different. Like it's definitely. Yeah. You can see the impact point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely impact point. Boom. Because I can. Yeah. It has. The Gambeson's defeated it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think this is a really good test. Is it completely conclusive? No, it's not. But what we have here is 11 actually, not 10. There's 10 arrows here on the target.
Yes,
one is broken, you can't see it. One's actually gone above the shield, wounded the soldier, but certainly not a fatal wound. Would definitely upset you. You don't want to do that. But and the armor actually, I wouldn't even say really affected. It's more a matter of just a lucky kind of graze rather than actually going into the. But I will say this though, it's gone into a region that even if it was a little bit lower, it'd go through, let's say, a shoulder joint, probably incapacitate the soldier, or at least, drastically affect their ability to continue and fight.
Or even you think of a bone in that section, that's going to slow the arrow down a little more. It'll skip
possibly.
off.
But I'm saying is in terms of the wounding, that would definitely, at least at minimum, I would say, is inhibit their ability to fight effectively.
Yeah.
Okay. But the rest of the arrows, we have got 2 penetrations out of 10 shots, 10 shots on the shield. And of those 2 penetrations, we are dealing with millimeters of penetration into an arm. Again, I wouldn't want to take that, but I don't think it's going to stop a soldier in a do or die situation. And that's with a 100-pound bow or a 120-pound bow at 50-60 yards simulated. Now, sure, we can get more powerful bows. I don't have a more powerful bow, 140, 150, 160-pound bows. That would be interesting to see how they would fare. I would definitely say just hypothesize that on the sleeves of the arm, if we're getting some small penetration on the arm with a 100-pound bow and that's a 120-pound bow at that range, I would say that 130, 140, 150 bow will cause a more severe injury. But what we are seeing is that even with a very light kind of serviceable gear, it's definitely, Gambeson is definitely serviceable, but even with a relatively light kind of get up, the shield is making the world of difference.
Absolutely. It's the difference between a painful injury and a few annoyances on the forearm.
Correct. Or if without the shield, what would this do to the soldier underneath? If there was no shield, if it's able to go through 42 layers of linen, if it hit dead in the center, that would likely be a killing blow from a bow of that power. And I think we've kind of done enough to demonstrate at least the synergizing effect of the compositing effect of shield and armor and what happens when you combine it together. I think we're seeing
the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, that's it. So hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for our next video where hopefully we get our Phil Parks mail sample, which is going to be a high quality piece of mail. Phil Parks has assured me it is a faithful reproduction of a 15th century piece of mail that he actually has in his possession, to the measurements of the inner diameter, the thickness of the rings, the quality of the metal as well. Everything about it is a faithful reproduction, and we will see how that goes. And what we're going to do with that one is we're going to replicate or recreate the Burgundian ordnance, the 15th century Burgundian ordnance, which stipulates a 10-layer jack above the mail, and then I interpret that underneath the mail there'll be something else like an arming doublet, and I'm going to assume about 5 layers of linen underneath, and that's only because that's what they use on Todd's channel as well, and it seems to be somewhere between 4 and 6 layers is what people do prescribe for an arming doublet, not a Gambeson. So it'll be
very much not a standalone once you've got all the way to the chainmail on top.
Correct, that's right. I think we'll see if the high quality mail itself provides the bulk of the defense for that one. But anyway, that's for another video for another time. I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for our next video, and thank you very much for watching again.
Yes.